I'm coming soon. Jesus also mentioned pestilence. What is pestilence? Pestilence is, well, anything that is like a strange disease or an affliction that wipes out your crops. Pestilence. It's where we get the word pest from. They're related words. Let's think about the last few years, like say the last 20 years or so, in the area of pestilence and disease. Have we had anything new crop up? Well, what about Streptococcus A? Remember, well, everybody has Streptococcus A in their body. You've all heard of strep throat, right? But in the last 20 or 30 years, strep throat decided to move out of your throat and onto the front of your body, and it became the flesh-eating disease. That's all happened in recent decades. Then spinal meningitis started to make a comeback. And then the Black Plague started to make a comeback in the last 10, 15 years or so in the streets of India. Then we had the Ebola virus. Sometimes we forget about how recent that really was. This strange new disease that killed people in an awful fashion. And incidentally, that disease has touched down accidentally in North America at least once in the last 20 years. They just managed to contain it and keep it relatively quiet. Tuberculosis is coming back in strains that cannot be treated by traditional medicine. Tuberculosis growing stronger. Then we got this brand new disease, SARS. Remember SARS? I was living in the city of Toronto when that broke out, and I remember what it was like. Everywhere we went, we had to wear masks in the hospitals and so on. I would go and visit people in the hospital. They would scrub us down, make us wear a mask, and when we went to the airport, they actually had a thermal imaging unit before you boarded your plane to tell whether or not you had a fever. So if you had a fever, they could pull you out of line and keep you away from the general population. SARS, another brand new disease. Then the West Nile virus started galloping through our neck of the woods, and I know of at least one person in my circle of friends that has died of the West Nile virus. Then the mad cow disease thing broke out. Started in Europe, but in recent history went to Canada. Now, I'm a Canadian, and we felt we should share it with you, and so now it's come down to America, mad cow disease. I was thinking about this. I've moved to California in the last 2 years, and I was driving along one day thinking about mad cow disease, and I saw this restaurant on the side of the road said, El Pollo Loco, and as I understand it, that's the crazy chicken. El Pollo Loco. Aren't they glad they didn't call it the crazy cow, because that just wouldn't sell. Mad cow disease, that's another new one. And now what is that thing that's brewing over in Asia? Bird flu. You know that the big flu back in 1918 had a 5% death rate? 5%, and it wiped out people. They called it a huge, devastating problem. The bird flu, should it finish making the leap to human, has a death rate of 50%, 10 times that of the flu in 1918. Watch out, said Jesus. When you see pestilence, then you know hospital deaths due to infection from drug-resistant bacteria have increased 7-fold in the last 12 years alone. Watch out, said Jesus. When you see, he also mentioned earthquakes. This is really, really interesting. Earthquakes. You know, a lot of people have talked about earthquakes and they've tried to measure them, and everybody uses a different yardstick or criteria to measure earthquakes. I went up into the library at the University of Victoria, and I thought, I'm going to go and check out some seismology books and check this out myself. Now, I'm going to admit that you get slightly different results depending on which criteria you use for what you consider a serious earthquake. But I did notice something. No matter what yardstick you used, the general pattern was exactly the same. So let me show you the general pattern I got as I tested for earthquakes that I would consider very major, shook cities and demolished buildings and killed people. The real biggies, say like 7.0 and up. I mean the big stuff. I did a little study. In the first 300 years after Jesus Christ, we had one such earthquake. Then from 300 to 500, we had two. From 500 to 800, we had one. From 800 to 1000 AD, we had three. From 1000 to 1100, we had two. And it goes on like that, pretty much the same. The 1100s were two. Then when we get into the 1300s, we had one. The 1400s, we had one. The 1500s, we had two. Then something interesting started to happen. In the 1600s, it went up to 7 in 1 century. Now that's a little bit of a spike, and you wonder if that's going to continue. In the 1700s, it nearly doubled and became 13. In the 1800s, it doubled and became 26. And in the 1900s, I stopped counting by about 1988 because I'd already hit better than 130. 130. Watch out, said Jesus. I know these things have always taken place, but when you see the contractions getting stronger and bigger and more frequent, then you know that my coming is near. Just like when the fig tree puts out its leaves, you know that summer is just about here. Then you know, when you see all these things, that my coming really is close. Last night we looked at that statue in Daniel chapter 2, the head of gold, the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, the feet part of iron and part of clay. We saw that everything in that prophecy was fulfilled to a T. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the divided Western Roman Empire, and that's where we find ourselves tonight. Last night we saw that the Bible says that in the days of these kings, the days when Europe would still exist, those same tribes would, as they came down through time, would still exist. A stone hits the statue, the Son of Man comes again, Jesus really does come again. That prophecy wasn't wrong in one detail. There's only one thing left to go. That's the second coming of Jesus, and it won't be wrong about that either. Then Jesus says, if you really want to know how close you are, watch the sorrows. Watch the birth pains and the contractions. Watch these things. Watch the earthquakes. Let's talk about that a little bit more. The tsunami earthquake. This was very recent history. It was 9.3 on the Richter scale. This was the first earthquake to be felt by every seismological device on the face of the planet. It is the longest earthquake in recorded history, 10 minutes long, and it created the biggest gash in the seabed ever observed, 800 miles long. You know, there have been 1,096 tsunamis of varying sizes and strengths since 1900, but the 2004 tsunami caused more devastation than all the 1,905 previous ones all put together. Watch out, said Jesus. It's really going to happen. And you'll know when you see the contractions getting bigger, stronger, and more frequent. Let me ask you a question tonight. What time is it? What time is it? Jesus said to watch for these things, and suddenly we see that they're all happening. Let me take you on a little tour of the headlines for the last 4 years, because as human beings, we forget so quickly what's really going on. What time is it? Let's go back to September 11, because an awful lot seemed to change at that date. Our whole world seemed to pivot. Some people have asked me, do you think that September 11 is anywhere in Bible prophecy? I haven't found it mentioned by name at all. But I have noticed that it seemed to be kind of a turning point in history where a lot of things started to come unglued. The World Trade Center collapsed at September 11th, 2001. You all remember that day. You'll never forget it. I was upstairs in the bedroom. I was shaving. I was running late for work. And out of the corner of one ear, I guess you don't look out of, you look out of the corner of your eye. I don't know how you hear out the corner of your ear, but I did it. I was listening out the corner of my ear, and I heard a plane had just hit the World Trade Center. I thought, that's unusual. And I went outside and I looked at the television, and there was this little smoldering hole. And at first I thought, that must have been an accident. How could that happen? And just like you, I watched as that second plane came into the picture and hit the building. I was horrified. My wife was on the other end of the country that day, and I thought, this is it. This changes everything. And something really did change. Let's look at the headlines. I've gathered the covers of Time magazine and so on for you to just think about over the last 4 years or so. On the heels of September 11th, somebody started sending anthrax in the mail. Do you remember that? Starting mailing anthrax. Now we've got pestilence, not going from person to person. We've got pestilence being delivered by the U.S. Postal System. That didn't used to happen. Don't tell me it used to happen. Once in a while you'd have a kook do something, but not as often and not as frequent as this. On the heels of that, we discovered we're going to war in the nation of Afghanistan. That effort is still going to this day to the tune of $1 billion every single month. Still ongoing. And as we were gasping for breath, considering what had happened at the World Trade Center, considering that some kook was mailing diseases in the mail, and considering that we were at war in Afghanistan, as we were digesting all of that, we got hit with the next headline. There was severe flooding in Europe that put 100,000 people out of their homes all of a sudden. All of a sudden, brand new, strange weather patterns that didn't used to happen. Then we heard about the nuclear threat in North Korea that was brewing. And as we were thinking about how awful that was, that's when somebody took a rifle and started shooting people for fun in the Beltway area in Washington, D.C. Now, don't tell me this kind of stuff used to happen this frequently and this awfully. It didn't. Yeah, when I was a kid, I grew up in northern British Columbia. Once in a while, somebody would shoot somebody by accident. And I understand that happened recently again. But it wasn't systematic and sick like this. Shooting people for fun. Some guy mowing his lawn, getting shot. Some guy gassing up the car, gets shot. And as we were thinking about how awful that was, that's when we went to war in the nation of Iraq. That war's still ongoing, $4 billion a month. And as soon as we'd gone to war in Iraq, that's when SARS hit. That's when SARS hit Asia, hit my hometown at the time of Toronto. I remember how awful that